stands 6 inches tall, weighs less than 8 ounces, and displays its games in monochrome black and green. The speaker's tinny and has an almost industrial design to it. It competed with color consoles, many with high-profile ports of beloved games. It competed with 16-bit consoles. And yet, through all of that, it took over the world. Sold more than 118 million units. So how did this console do it? How did this little Mac of gaming consoles knock out the big Mike Tysons? What about this humble handheld captured the imagination of a generation, myself included? It's time to stock up on those batteries and pack a clip-on light because we're taking a road trip into the sensation that was the Nintendo Game Boy. Right here on A Gamer Looks at 40. Nearly everyone in my circle of friends had some sort of connection to the little gray box that could. Blue Williams, gaming journalist and co-host of the Story Mode podcast, gets us started. I do know you're big into handhelds, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Handhelds are your jam. The Game Boy came out towards the very end of the NES life cycle, when it was the relevant life cycle. And right before the SNES, it came out, I think it was 89 or 90.
Mm-hmm.
Forgot what it was. Did you get a Game Boy? When did you get your first Game Boy?
Yes, it was. Gosh, I don't remember the year, but I think it was relatively new. We got one Game Boy to share among the household, which
how does that happen?
Yeah, there was some struggles. Yeah. We had to there was some bargaining. You can have my dessert if I can have the Game Boy tonight, kind of thing. But gosh, I loved that thing. It was so great because one of the rules we had in our household was we were only allowed a half hour of TV time. So, do I want to watch DuckTales after school or do I want to play games? It's really, these are like Sophie's choices here. So the Game Boy meant so much to me because I could hide in my room and play video games on that little green screen and get my fill of games that I wanted, but without getting in trouble for it.
That's pretty neat. So you kind of circumvented the rule because it wasn't a TV.
Right, exactly.
That's interesting because now in my family we have to say screen time. It's
right. It's different now.
If it's a glass thing that glows and your face is in front of it, the timer's a ticking, young man. Although, yeah, sometimes we're just like, dude, just watch TV. We're sorry, we're sick of it. Just please, just watch. Do that, please. 5 hours, it's fine. As my son binges on Paw Patrols, Joey shares his experience with Game Boy obsession.
So when the Game Boy came, the Nintendo Game Boy, I jumped all over that. I got it for Christmas of that year of '89, and wow, that was another great experience. That was, we're playing in the car. I mean that was. Again, you could fill a whole episode of just that. This is incredible. This is another great experience. We're playing in the car. We're smuggling it in school. I'm sneaking it in my backpack. I'm asking the teacher of every class if I can go to the bathroom, just to get another fix and play it in the stall. It was incredible. I mean, there was the Tiger, there was the handheld games, but they weren't games. They were games, I should say, but that wasn't a console experience where, that was the tagline for Nintendo. Now you're playing, so Nintendo's tagline was Nintendo, now you're playing with power. The Game Boy came out, so Nintendo, now you're playing with power, portable power. And
that's right.
You felt like, I'm having a console experience in my car. And boy, was it. The Mario game, what a great Mario Land. That you really felt like, wow, they did it. They did it. They condensed a whole home console experience into this portable where it's not quite 8-bit, but I don't even care. I don't care. This is tremendous.
But no handheld console would be complete without a mountain of things to plug into it. Blue tells us about her favorite Game Boy accessories. Also, the Game Boy is famous for accessories. How many accessories did you have for your Game Boy?
Oh, we had definitely the light. We had the magnifying screen. And we had the big carry case that was also shaped like a Game Boy.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, yeah.
That's cool. I never knew that was a thing.
Oh, dude, you got to get on eBay like tonight and look this stuff up.
It's shaped like a Game Boy? It's like a giant Game Boy.
It's like a
carrying
giant
case?
Game Boy, and you put all your Game Boy stuff in the giant Game Boy. It
That's
was
like-
so cool. Gosh, I wish I knew what happened to that.
I just wanted so I can carry my lunch to work or something. Like that's amazing. That's so good. That's cool. So you didn't. That's interesting. Now you didn't have the battery pack. So
No.
So when you went on family trips, did you just carry the giant?
Bring all of the batteries, but
all
then,
the batteries.
yeah, I mean, it was a little bit easier for me because I couldn't play in the car anyway, or there'd be puke everywhere.
Oh, is motion sickness a thing?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a bummer. That's the whole point of the Game Boy, so you can sit in the
I
car
know.
on long road trips.
That's
Yeah.
okay, because when you got to where you were going and the grown-ups were all sitting around talking and being really boring, then you just pull out the Game Boy.
It's like, haven't looked at my TV. I mean, screen. I mean, toy. This is a
Yep.
toy, right? Yeah.
Can we go play with our toys?
Not to be outdone by his co-host, Ryan from Story Mode tells us about his most fashionable Game Boy accessories. What peripherals did you have for it?
So I had this really ugly fanny pack that was pink and black.
That sounds amazing.
And I wore that thing like it was a badge of honor.
That's it. Oh man, did it fit like games and
Oh, yeah.
Game Boy?
Yeah.
Did you fit like batteries in there?
Oh yeah, I
Oh,
was
my
like the
God.
full-on nerd with like the Casio watch, like walking around in my fanny pack. Like,
Nice. Saved
Yeah.
by the Bell. Got nothing on you.
Yeah,
Well
exactly.
done. Well done indeed. That's cool. So you had all that. You had like the light and the battery pack and all that fun stuff.
we had the cigarette lighter adapter because cars
Okay.
used to come with a cigarette lighter,
Sure.
right? But
Smart.
that's because batteries, of course, were a pain in the butt to change out while you were driving. So that was certainly a help.
Forget about lights and battery packs. Joey seems to remember NASA level tech designed for the Game Boy. Not really though. Let's listen in.
Then the next thing was I got enough games. Let's get peripherals. And for that system, my God, they had everything, didn't they?
Everything. Yep.
They had satellites that were coming off that thing towards the end. They had a printer. They had a keyboard. There was like an office boy that people were using it as like a makeshift Newton before the Newton. It was
It's like a PDA, right?
yeah. The PDA. They had speakers that you could amplify the sound. They had a magnifying glass because of Tetris. The parents were getting in, and Dad couldn't see the Tetris, so they had the magnifying glass. I only had the one. I had the light, which to me was the one that was most, that was needed. I mean, that was the only knock on the Game Boy. I didn't even care about the monochrome. That was the big selling point for Game Gear. Color. Don't you care that you're playing in black and white? No, I didn't care. I don't care. That was not a drawback to me. The drawback to me was the light and nothing else. Not the battery life, nothing. If they got a light on that thing, that would have been the perfect portable system in perpetuity.
Trevor from the New Dad Gaming Podcast shares memories of car ride accessories. What about you, man? What were those connection games for you?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I don't know that I really have any that stand out. When I bought it used, it had like all of the accessories with it. So it had the screen magnifier that like flip over top. It had the extra speakers. It had the night light because, the first versions, the big gray blocky ones, didn't have any backlighting. So if you wanted to play it at night during a car ride, you had to have that. So now here you are trying to assemble like a sniper rifle as far as like snap, slide, snap. Like, all right, now I'm going to play games at night as we go for this car trip. But even that, like, it makes it yours. Like this is mine. it and I are connected. We're going to get through this event together, and I'm just going to snap it and bend it to what I need it to do.
The Game Boy was nothing if not versatile. But in the end, you had to pop a cartridge into the top of that device and play some games. We talk about the games that marked our fandom after the break. A couple of weeks ago, Moses Norton and I dove into Mario like scuba divers on a mission. Now, if you enjoyed that conversation, you're going to adore MageCast. Moses and a rotating cast of friends, mages, and various ne'er-do-wells pick a game and analyze it in every which way possible. From classics like Turtles in Time to lesser-known titles like Cosmic Star Heroine, MageCast takes a slightly serious glance at fascinating games. And inevitably, somebody sings. Check out the entire series of MageCast on your pod player of choice today. I mean, for me, Tetris was my game. I still adore Tetris. I think if you had to ask me what the perfect game is, it'd be Tetris.
Yep.
I think Tetris is perfect. I've said it again on other shows and whatnot, but if Tetris cannot be improved upon. It can only be iterated upon.
Correct.
You can only make new versions. You can tack onto it, but none of those additions ever make it really better. Mm-hmm. The core of that game cannot be improved. It's like elemental. I think if there was a periodic table of game elements, Tetris would be next to carbon. Like that's where it would be. It would sit there it'd be oxygen essentially, because the mechanics of that are so simple and so pure that it's mind blowing how much joy in game. And Tetris is like life and death. It is. Tetris is the cyclical nature of life because you can't beat Tetris. You can only survive it. And eventually you die. Eventually you lose. You cannot succeed at Tetris. So and it's order into chaos. You have your order and then life happens and things, you have it all in place. And all the blocks are falling and everything is in place. And we're good. And boom, you make a mistake. Or something happens that's beyond your control. And all of a sudden, it all just turns to garbage. And then you, in life, you have to repair said garbage. And you work to repair it. And then more garbage happens. And it's just order to chaos to order gameplay loop is beyond incredible. Blue, who's a member of the Story Mode podcast, she was on and talking about Dr. Mario. And that's her favorite game. Nice. One of her favorite games is Dr. Mario. And I like Dr. Mario a lot, but you can beat Dr. Mario. You can win. You can defeat all the viruses. Tetris's order into chaos loop until you eventually lose is special and rare and gorgeous. So I want to do a show just on Tetris.
It sounds like you should.
I love Tetris so much. So anyway, Tetris would be that game for me. Maybe that and Kirby's Pinball.
Nice. So with it for us, I mean, the games that stuck out for me are a bit more obscure. There's not super obscure, I can't say it in that way, but there's a Balloon Kid. Sure. So flying around with those two balloons, and then eventually goes down to one balloon, which is terribly annoying. There's Bionic Commando.
Oh yeah,
which
I forgot there was a Game Boy version of that.
Yeah, what was reading on it in kind of some preparation for the show is I found out it was a Nintendo port. So this was a full NES 2 Game Boy game, but approached much differently than it was done at the time. Apparently there was a lot of straight ports as far as just make this show up on the screen with some horrendous results. Right. This one was really a complete redo in some ways, where it took all the assets, all the gameplay from the Nintendo version, but then formatted it for the tiny screen.
Gotcha. That's interesting. That's cool. I didn't realize there was a Bionic Commando for Game Boy. That's awesome. Yeah. What about those games really caught you, do you think?
I think so Bionic Commando was probably the difficulty and the movement, because with that one in particular, you had the Gatling arm. So, and that's probably the first time I'd ever even heard that concept. Which now Scorpion or
sure.
You could probably rifle off 3 or 4 characters that have something to that effect, throwing an arm or extending.
Yep.
But to see that as far, and the sense of movement, then so you throw it up and ahead of you, you're able to swing then and just having that kind of flow. But it also had this real restrictive gameplay where, if I remember it, you couldn't jump. Like, so your only way to actually move and get over obstacles was with this arm.
That's right. Yes.
So if you're playing, if you're in a session and you're playing Mario, Super Mario Land, and you're bouncing about, and then you get over to this game, it's weirdly frustrating, but really weirdly compelling in the sense that you can't do any jumping in this darn thing.
That's funny.
And it's this wild, futuristic war type scenario. Like, it's all kind of crazy. And I think
That
too
is
with
yeah.
go on.
Oh, so go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
Yeah, and I mean that kind of leads into that Super Mario Land, which still feels like the weirdest Mario game that was ever produced, and I include in that like Super Mario 2, which is totally off the wall, but just the way that game played was it felt like the knockoff like Russian counterpart to Mario. Like that was Mario adjacent. Like it was very, it's like if
It's Mario adjacent.
yeah, like if it didn't say Nintendo on it, I don't really believe that they actually built this game because it feels real weird compared to any Mario I'd played.
I love Mario Land so much. I think it's such a great little game. It's so good. It's the game that legitimized the Game Boy as a proper console.
True.
Like Tetris made it a sensation. Tetris made the Game Boy a must-have toy. But Mario Land was like, oh my gosh, this is a Mario game, like a real game. Weird, sure, Easter Island heads running around and the Super Ball and all sorts of other nonsense, but yeah, this is a real Mario game that you jump and stomp on things and one-ups and etc. And yeah, the little Goombas explode, which is whatever. But Mario Land's a game once every 6 months. I fire that game up and I roll through it for the half an hour it takes to get through it. I love that game so much. Such a neat little game. While Trevor and I were playing Mario Land, Blue was delving into the dark side with her favorite games. What was your game?
Oh gosh. Well, we definitely had Tetris and we had Dr. Mario, so those were great. I really, really loved Kirby Dream Land, especially once you got to the end and you unlocked the higher difficulty. That was like, oh yeah. And then the Star Wars trilogy games on the Game Boy. I was such a Star Wars nerd as a kid. So having those was like, it felt like the greatest thing ever to happen. Like I can have Star Wars on my Game Boy, like the two things that I love most put together.
I've never even seen those, I don't think.
Oh yeah, I mean, objectively, they're not very good games, but they're still, they're still really fun.
Yeah, that's cool, and it's Star Wars. I mean,
yeah, it's Star Wars.
It's an intrinsic good. So
yeah, you turn it on, you get that iconic music with the title screen. It really doesn't get any better.
I gotta look this up now. I gotta look up Game Boy Star Wars. Continuing the Mario Land love, Michael K. Hughes from Games My Mom Found heaps the praise and shares some of the bizarre titles in his collection. I've had this conversation not with you, but tangentially with you, and how you guys, not you, but Mike and that other co-host of yours really beat up on poor sweet Mario Land pretty bad.
I think that was an Emmanuel episode. So.
Yeah, it was Emmanuel, and you stood up for Mario Land pretty good.
Oh, I had this discussion with Mike probably just a week ago that it's still just a fine game. Leave it alone.
It's a perfectly sweet, fine game. I love Mario Land. So
it was their first attempt at their 4-bit graphics, and that music, that soundtrack is still one of the best on the system. So.
It's now in my head. Thank you.
Oh, it's fantastic. You're
so
welcome.
Good. I'm very happy. I'm perfectly fine with this. Mario Land is cool because it was a proof of concept. Like it legitimized the Game Boy as a video game system, not just like a toy. You guys know my opinions on Tetris. It's still it's a puzzle game and it's a game, but it's not like a console experience. Tetris, right? Because we can play Tetris on anything. To this day, we can play it on anything. But Mario Land was that proof of concept. Like it was you can play a Mario game on this Game Boy, and that it succeeded mightily because it is a good, solid, breezy 20-minute Mario game.
Yep,
great. You are a handheld guy.
Oh yeah, for sure. To this day, I usually have my DS or something in my pocket at all times.
Yeah, it's crazy. Not crazy. It's cool. I shouldn't say that. Crazy is mean. It's pretty neat though that you're into handhelds. Like you had that episode of I think it was top 10 handheld.
Yeah,
games.
the first top 10 back in February.
Yeah, it was great, and I had heard of none of them. Like your list was foreign to me, and then I realized, I don't play a lot of handheld games.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming you started with the Game Boy.
Oh yeah, for sure.
How many? Oh, go for it. Yeah.
I know we had Tetris and the Turtles game for that, Fall of the Foot Clan. We had some kind of sports game, football game, because my brother was a big sports guy. Oh, man. Load Runner? Like, I can see the box art.
Load Runner?
Yeah. Oh, man.
Sounds familiar.
Judging from, like, the box art, you would think it was a Mega Man clone, because it's this guy in, like, this red and yellow, basically armor, just like Mega Man's, but it's a weird puzzle platformer, I'm going to say.
Interesting. Okay.
Oh, man.
Load Runner. Weird. All right, we'll have to look that up as an addendum. So you had the Fall of the Foot Clan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anything else of note? Other than, of course, Tetris and... Yeah.
There's one I can see in my head, but I can't remember the name of it. The box art is this anthropomorphic tomato with sunglasses on. And it was like you had to rotate pieces in the level to make it through. Damn, what was that called?
Anthropomorphic tomato.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
As was the 90s.
As was. Everything was a mascot. You stick some legs and eyes on an inanimate object.
Yeah,
you had a mascot.
If the little red circle in the 7-Up can be a mascot, then like anything was fair game.
Yeah, cool spot. If I'm
Cool
not mistaken.
spot.
That's it. Not a bad little game. The Genesis version's not bad.
Oh man, those bonus level tracks are still. That music is awesome.
Oh god, I gotta look it up now. I can't remember them. I remember the Genesis game one being pretty good.
Also, for people banging their head against the keyboard, that game was Quark with the tomato.
Okay.
I went to type in Game Boy tomato game and it autofilled, so apparently I'm not the only person to look this up. Awesome.
Yeah. You're not the only one with that hazy recollection of this, this laughing, dancing tomato puzzle game. That's funny. From walking, talking vegetables to strange games regarding universal monsters, my brother and I talk a little bit about this one particular game that vexed us as kids. Let's listen in. Do you remember? We had a couple of weird ones, though. We had a few games that Aunt Nancy got us. And I do want to do a series on games our aunts got us. Not just, but that's just kind of what it was, right? Because they didn't get the Nintendo Power. They didn't get the Santa Claus list. They just went to this. And Bob, you might like this. Remember Dr. Franken?
I had Dr. Franken for Game Boy. Yes, yes.
What a strange... Did you ever beat that, first off?
Trying to remember. I'm not kidding. I couldn't beat it when I was a kid, but I did. I still have the Game Boy. So once in a while I will dust it off, and it works pretty good. I did very recently beat Dr. Franken.
Are you
a couple
serious?
years ago. Yeah, I found because the game is very unforgiving. You have to know exactly what order of rooms to get. You have to collect all the parts of your bride, Frankenstein's bride.
Right.
And,
so just to kind of give a quick background, you play as a goofy, cartoony Frankenstein, and your goal is you walk around this mansion shooting laser beams, right? Like little electric
bolts.
shocks. That's it.
Lightning bolts. Yeah.
Lightning bolts. Thank you. Out of your hands. Yeah. Against all these kind of wacky, goofy enemies. And the goal is to, like you said, find all the parts of your bride and put her back together.
Put them back together while maintaining your own electricity, while also maintaining, I think, like you need oil for your light, I think, because if you run out, the game goes dark.
Yeah, because there's some sort of timer.
There's a ticking clock element to the whole thing.
God.
So I love exploring games. That's became more of I love. Later on, I would become fans of like King's Quest games and stuff. But I love games where you explore and go to the outsides. But as a kid, like to beat that clock, it was really hard. So I think a couple of years ago, I found like a walkthrough, and boy, was that hard to find. But I found a text walkthrough and told me which rooms to go in first. And I think I actually beat it for the first time.
With the walkthrough, but that's okay. You still have to do the things.
Yeah, I had to. It had to be done.
That's awesome. I'm so glad I brought that up. While the rest of my guests got their games via wholesome means, Joey acquired his titles in less than scrupulous ways. Let's listen in.
I get the Game Boy. I get it with 2 games. Dad must have done well that year financially. We're still in Bloomfield in '89. I have not moved to West Caldwell, so I said, comes with Tetris? Yeah. So then give me Mario Land. I asked for Mario Land. And then about a week later, I got Ninja Turtles. How did I get Ninja Turtles? We went to the Sizzler, and we went and sat in the booth, and it's there. And I'm fighting my mother. No, we got to put this in lost and found. No, I want it. No. Someone's going to come back for it. No, I want it. It's stealing. No, it isn't. It was left here. Big argument. All right, Joseph, I'll make a deal with you. We'll have the meal, the whole meal. And if no one comes back for the meal by the time by the time we're ready to leave, fine. Finders keepers. I'm sweating the entire meal. And nobody came. So yes, like clockwork. I've had this system for a week. I've got 3 games: Ninja Turtles, Tetris, and Mario Land.
We've hooked up the external light and have some games in our hands, but now it's time to reflect on where we played our portable systems. After the break, we take some trips with our beloved Game Boy. Made it this far? You are a champion among champions, fair sir or lady. Elevate your status to Grand Master by leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. This is hyper important in getting this show exposed to a larger audience. More listeners mean more guests, mean more stories, etc., etc. And if you want your project or show featured in one of these breaks, hit me up at agamerlooksat40@gmail.com. If I dig it, I'll talk about it. It's how the economy of this show kind of works. So let me know. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the rest of this episode. So what I wanted to talk about, though, and the main thing that I've been hearing often with these conversations is the stories of what they did with this mini console. Well, I can't say mini console. It was a full-fledged, of course, portable console. The trips they've been on, the long car rides it saved. Do you have any specific stories or recollections of when the Game Boy saved you from a particularly arduous...
car rides, of course. Yeah, rides. I look back now in the rearview mirror when the kids are in the car and we could be going for 2 to 3 hours a commute on vacation somewhere, or just over my in-laws who are an hour away. And the time flies. I mean, the time literally flies because they have their tablets and they have their cell phones and they have their iPhones. And, all we had was the Game Boy. They're able to get information, at a click of a finger. They can go on YouTube and watch anything they want. I'm not envious of them, but I remember when we had those same trips, vacations. We drove to Florida one time with my father. My mother drove us to Florida. Yeah, the Game Boy was there. Newport, Rhode Island. You came with me on some of those trips. Plymouth,
I remember
Massachusetts.
Newport. I went
Newport.
To,
anytime, Cape Cod, wherever we went to that was 2 to 3 hours away. My Game Boy was right there with me, as well as my Game Gear. Don't forget, I was a Sega guy, so I got both. We actually had the Lynx too. The portables were great. They were always a generation behind. They came out 89, 90. The Lynx came out in 91, and that's the 16-bit era, right?
Yeah.
But the portables were the 8-bit era. And then you get to the 32-bit era, and they were the 16-bit era. The portables had advanced, and so on. Even in the 64-bit era, if you look at the portables, the Game Boy Advance is 32-bit. The Virtual Boy was 32-bit. They were always a generation behind. But their games, they were fantastic. And that was always a game, a contest, I should say, in and of itself. What to bring, what peripheral to bring, what batteries to bring, what games to bring. We didn't have, emulators or ROMs at our fingertips. We had actual cartridges, and then you're battling with space. So yeah, I mean, every vacation, it was with me in hand.
No, that's cool. Because, again, everyone I've been talking to has been sharing these stories of we were on our way to Michigan and nothing as dramatic as like the car breaking down or anything like that. But just these like these stories of just boredom saved. By these devices. And our parents were actually fine with it. I remember going on long trips like to the Poconos. We never took crazy long trips, but we'd go from, our neck of the woods, Bloomfield / Newark, New Jersey.
Yeah.
We'll drive to the Poconos, which is about a 2-hour drive in Pennsylvania. And we would go, and it was like free time to play games. Like I could play my Game Boy the entire time if I wanted to, if I had the batteries and the power pack, the battery pack and all the rest of it. And that was great. And our parents were like, go ahead. What else are you going to do? You're stuck in this car.
Yeah.
So at home, you had limitations. You couldn't eat after, you couldn't play after, dinner or weekdays and weekends or whatever it is. But on the car ride, it was just free for all.
Yeah. No, it was go for it. You're right. That's a great point. I mean, there was limitations. You couldn't play video games past bedtime, when dinner was done, when the dishes were clean, when your homework was done, whatever kids are dealing with as far as limitations. But yeah, to your point, when you're on a family trip with 2 kids, or in your case, 3 kids, you just want the kids to be quiet and not bicker. So yeah, if you had 3 or 4 or 5 good games, you could, the trip would fly. I have no real particular story when the Game Boy saved me per se, but like I said, whether it was Florida, Niagara Falls, Newport, Rhode Island, Cape Cod, Plymouth, those were the haunts of the Coiros. The Game Boy was definitely my savior for sure.
Ryan's Game Boy didn't just save him from car boredom. It gave him a needed distraction during a, let's say, uncomfortable day.
So one of the things that my family did every single year was we would go on a family vacation. And the biggest thing that we would do is we would fly to a certain state. You would get into a car and you would drive around quite a bit. I loved the idea of traveling, but being in a car cooped up for hours at a time trying to get from one location to the other, I am quite thankful that the Game Boy was there to assist me during that time frame, because I would have gone nuts. So it was essentially my babysitter as a kid.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. The iPad of the day. Yes.
Right. So, I mean, and the beauty of that, too, is that it gave you an opportunity to really get into games, where I think one of the things that you run into with, Game Boy as a kid is that you did it in between stuff. It was something that you did to pass the time, and having hours to do that really got into a lot of the games that I owned. And I still have fond memories of, playing Kirby's Pinball. Playing, Fortress of Fear, which is a terrible game, but still played a heck of a lot of that. Dr. Mario, we ended up playing Super Mario Land and Super Mario Land 2, the 6 golden coins. Oh my goodness. Played so much of that. So,
any specific stories of your portable games kind of saving you on either long trips? I know you've mentioned a few trips, ferry trips and stuff and whatnot. Anything specific that you kind of remember those systems saving you from?
For sure. So I remember we went to Yellowstone, and I, for some reason, just was deathly ill sitting in the car. And I was trying to explain that to my parents, and they're like, listen, you do realize that this is like the last time we're ever going to be here. You're going to miss out on these really cool, mud pots or whatever it was that they wanted to do for the day. And I did not feel well. So I plugged in Super Mario Land 2, the 6 golden coins. And I remember at the time I was struggling to get through the toy area, and just the pure determination, because I wasn't feeling well. I was like, I'm going to get through this. This is what's going to make this worth it, because I'm going to miss out on what my parents told me I was going to miss out. And they left me in the car, which I can't believe they did that.
Wow. They just stuck you and left you in the car?
Yeah. They're like, probably, but still, it was like, we're just going to leave you and we're going to walk,
That's funny. Did
half
they crack
a mile.
A window for you? Did they crack a window for you?
Probably.
Just kidding.
Leave a snorkel for you.
Yeah. So you were stuck there. You're in the car. Your stomach or whatever was killing you. You're playing 6 golden coins, toy level. Did you persevere? Did you make missing out on the mud pits worth
I
it?
did. So I beat it, and then they came back, and that's when I threw up outside of the car. So. It's like I was holding it in anticipation.
You're like an athlete who like makes it to the finish line and just collapse in complete. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. That's cool. Imagine if you didn't have that Game Boy. You would you have sat there and just been in pain.
I would have probably thrown up on a mud pie.
It's so interesting how I think the portable gaming, and again, it's something that we almost don't appreciate anymore, right? Because it's so ubiquitous on the phone and everything else. But how portable gaming when we were kids was true freedom.
Oh yeah,
like you had a game in your hands that you didn't have to share with anybody. No one else had. It was for you and you alone. And I think it's interesting that you hear these stories of how a portable game kind of got you through a scenario, right? A long night in the woods or intestinal distress in your scenario. Yeah, man, that's a really cool memory for sure. And finally, Trevor and I share stories of long car rides and vacations to random places and uncover some lovely truths about this incredible console. Do you have a recollection, because you did talk about taking you and your bag. I had the bag of accessories. I had the power pack and the light and the magnifier and the game, little caddy of games. Do you have any good recollections of you taking that just collection of Game Boy stuff and going on that road trip and desperately needing that thing for mental survival?
Remember, like, depending on your deposition, you could actually look forward to road trips in some ways because it was unmitigated Game Boy time. It's like now, I don't know if you were much of a reader when you were younger. I was. I think a lot of people in our generation were readers. When I think about it, there's a lot of push for us. But what a road trip to me meant was great. I get to read these books. I get to play my Game Boy, like naps, snacks, a couple Tim Hortons runs, like or Dunkin' Donuts in the American parlance. Yep. There was just all these great occurrences that then would happen on road trips because of that. So, I mean, taking on the road and it being an absolute savior for sure. It's like, we're going on a road trip. Woo! Super Mario Land. Let's do this.
That's awesome. Cool. Do you have a specific example, like anything specific that kind of happened?
So, I mean, we were really fortunate when I was young. We had a cottage. My folks did. And it was, 3-4 hours away. So during the summertime, we would try to go up as often as possible. And the constant, the one constant in all those trips was like, oh, another trip to the cottage, another trip with 3 or 4 hours with my siblings. I'm one of 4. And we did not get along in a classic classic sense, as far as constant teasing. I mean, we're really close now, but so sibling fightings. I got 3 hours of this. This is going to be terrible, but I got Tetris, I got Super Mario Land, I got some Bionic Commando. I remember at some stage, if I'm not misremembering, we might have lucked out and had a second Game Boy and the cable.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool.
So I think this is like when it's well beyond its prime, and we picked it up for like a song at a garage sale type of thing. So we weren't like in the heat of Game Boy era, but we still were able to find some. And I think the only game we could possibly find was Balloon Kid, which is at a frustrating. You want to talk about like getting siblings to fight? Just give them a couple copies of Balloon Kid, and there is going to be screaming.
There's going to be outrage.
Yeah, so between a couple vicious Balloon Kid matches between my brother and I, and trying to crank through any number of these games, it was very much the savior of the constant road trips off to the lake, to the cottage. How about yourself?
We used to go take road trips. We never really had vacations per se growing up. We always took day trips everywhere. And so we used to go to the Poconos. Again, I'm from northern New Jersey, right outside of Newark, basically, just to give you an idea. And we used to drive, across the state to the Poconos in Pennsylvania. And it was always, I don't know why, they took us there. We'd go to there's nothing in the Poconos at all. Unless you're like a couple on a honeymoon and you want to go to a really bad resort. That's kind of what the Poconos is. And but for kids, there's nothing there. Like maybe we would go to the water, like a water park. Maybe we would go It's one of these water parks. We would go to Candle Shop, or we'd go to like Odd Lot, which is like this discount warehouse of like basically a giant dollar store, but a giant, we did a fireworks store, so my brother could buy fireworks, or just these horrible trips. and inevitably my dad would get lost and the car would be going up something and I would just sitting there on the Game Boy. It was just there. And it saved so many of these road trips, and I don't have a specific one, but definitely they all kind of blur together to be one long road trip.
That's what so that's what I said. Like I hear that story and it just resonates so much for myself, having a Game Boy. And for me, that's just where it really comes into the experience, the intimacy, that connection. It's just you and that ugly gray box.
Yeah, no.
Spending some time getting through certain scenarios. And so it wasn't so much about like that amazing Final Fantasy game on Game Boy. It was that time in the Poconos with the Game Boy and getting through a couple hours.
Yeah, just getting through it and enjoying yourself and having and having that game experience in your hands. And it's funny, the Game Boy was not a very attractive system that you mentioned it. It is an ugly gray brick that's green and more green.
Green, two kinds of gray. The gray eventually did get yellow.
Yep.
Like very badly. The batteries eventually would blow up in the back. You had to try to clean that up. Like it was like God, like four double A's if I remember right.
Yep. 4 AA's, yep. And then of course whatever accessories you had, of course your power pack, you had to charge that beforehand. And your light had to have 2 AA's.
The monstrosity it represented by the time you got everything connected was just just hilarious to look back on. Like speakers, light, magnifier, battery pack. It's just weighs like 40 pounds.
It's a giant Medusa head of cables and screens and speakers. That's funny. Oh man, but no, the Game Boy was definitely represented a certain freedom.
There was something about the portability of that system and the intimacy, because it's not a TV and a plug and like this big open world space. This is this tiny handheld thing that you have with you. This is the console that you had hidden under your blanket when you're supposed to be sleeping. This was the console you had in the playground with your buddies. This was the console that you had on that long road trip that got you through those like hours and hours of driving as you're just cranking away at a Tetris or Super Mario Land or something like that. So I think I find most interesting with the Game Boy is, unlike other nostalgia conversations with systems, like the Game Boy for me, and I'd be curious your thoughts on it. Well, it was very much more about that intimacy and that experience of where you were playing that system. Where were you with your Game Boy? Where did you take, or what did your Game Boy get you through?
Yeah, that's that. I'll let you start with that because you are the guest on the show. but no, I'll lead in. I'll lead in then with that is a very interesting way of putting it. How intimacy, because I have never thought of it that way until you just mentioned that, because you hold it close. Right, and not to get too dramatic or too wordy on it, but
too romantic,
too romantic, literally almost too romantic. But it's a game that the screen is 2 inches from your face, right, and it's just yours. It's nobody else's. You ever try to look over someone's shoulder while they're playing Game Boy? Nigh impossible. You can't do it. So it's just you and this game. That is a very interesting and yes, almost romantic kind of idea of being that closely linked to a console. Intimate. I mean, there's not a better way to describe the relationship we all had with our Game Boys. There's just something comforting about that small little brick with the industrial face, that monochrome green screen just glowing underneath your bed sheets or in the back of a car, or just when you needed something to escape with. That thing was magic. Absolute magic. All in a bite-sized 4-bit system no one really should have cared about in the first place. Thank you so much to all of my guests for joining me on this edition of A Gamer Looks at 40. If you like the show, follow me on Twitter at A Gamer Looks at 40. And if you have a story for the program, please let me know. Send me an email at agamerlooksat4040 at gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.